Greetings, everyone. I'm Jay Magaziner. I'm the director of the Center for Research on Aging at the University of Maryland, Baltimore. And I really want to welcome everybody. I'm pleased everybody is here. I think we've had a tremendous turnout from the School of Medicine and the rest of the campus to look at what's going on in the field of aging on our campus. And there's quite a lot. And I've learned a lot about some of the work that's going on here. We have 50 plus posters, which I think you've had a chance to look at, and most of them are still up. So when we're done, you can go over there and take a look at them more. I hope you've had a chance to talk with different people displaying their work and making some new connections with one another for the sake of advancing your own work and theirs. One of our goals really was to provide a forum for you to really meet others and learn about what's going on in the field that you may not know about. There's always room for more connectivity in doing work in aging. The handout you were provided has a list of the affiliates of the Center for Research on Aging. That's the one with the Dr. Hodes on the cover. And it is organized in a way that helps you identify people who are doing work in various fields that might be relevant to what you're trying to accomplish in your labs and in your programs. There are 138 affiliates currently, and we've really come a long way in how the center's developed, which I'll tell you about in a couple of minutes. Before I introduce the School of Medicine Dean to welcome you to Leadership Hall and this wonderful space in the School of Medicine, where we'll be hearing from Dr. Hodes in a few minutes, I'd like to thank some of the people that have made this event possible and coordinated it. First, Reba Kornman, who's here. Reba is recently retired. She was the director of our Geriatrics and Gerontology Research and Education program on our campus. She has been extremely supportive of our work in aging and our research efforts and our education efforts, and we thank her for all of her service and for helping us say, we got to do something big as I'm walking out the door, and let's do this. So she was really very instrumental with doing this. And also the program planning committee, which included, and I hope I'm not missing anyone, members of our leadership group in the center, Nikki Brandt from the School of Pharmacy, Beth Galick from the School of Nursing, Amanda Lenning, School of Social Work, Stephen Gambert, and Jacob Blumenthal from the School of Medicine. So thank you to them. And I also want to, And I also want to recognize the tremendous assistance from Lauren Schmand, Justine Golden, and Joella Trenchard from the Pepper Center and Center for Research on Aging and our doctoral program in gerontology, as well as Edner Okech and Zach Cahill from the Peter Lamy Center in the School of Pharmacy. Thank you all for your help. The organization was excellent, and I think you've done a really superb job in pulling this poster event together. Finally, this event would not have been possible without the able leadership and planning by Ann Sullins. Ann is the program manager for our Pepper Center and our Center for Research on Aging, is just this wonderful, quiet person who just pulls it all together. And without Ann and others who are in the position that she's in, I don't think any of what we try to accomplish here would happen. So thank you very much, Ann. Next, it really does give me great pleasure to introduce someone who many of you know, probably most of you know, which none of this would have been possible without his support for our center, for our programs in aging, and for our efforts in the recent Festival of Science, which was about a year ago, where we advanced work in aging and really featured it. That is the Dean of the School of Medicine, Executive Vice President for Medical Affairs of the John Z. and Akiko K. Bowers Distinguished Professor and Dean of the University of Maryland School of Medicine, Dr. E. Albert Reese, to bring you welcomes. Dr. Reese.
Thank you, Dr. Magazina. Thank you very much for your introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and good afternoon. And it's good to see so many of you here to have this discourse on the topic of research on aging. As Dr. Magazina mentioned at the conclusion of his presentation, we had the good fortune of having the theme on aging for her most recent day-long Festival of Science. And that really was a wonderful eye-opener. So it's good to have a continuation of that effort. As I prepared a few remarks to give, I always like to look back and see the scope of the center, or the scope of the enterprise, or whatever that happens to be. And I'm very, very impressed to see that there's been just a dramatic expansion on the work of the Center on Aging. This expansion has led the center to now have, as Dr. Magazina mentioned, more than 130 members and over $60 million in extramural funds each year. And that's extraordinary, and I wish to extend my congratulations to each of you. But I think equally important is your presence. So many of you here representing your interest, your enthusiasm, and your involvement in the center's mission and activities, not to mention the investment in one of your collectively most vulnerable populations. While the support that you give is certainly influences the success of the center, please know that you're also playing a role in the larger picture of the field of gerontology and geriatrics. The University of Maryland Claude Pepper Older Americans Independence Center has now been in operation for over 25 years, continuously funded. That is also worth celebrating. The Pepper Center has successfully demonstrated that rehabilitation interventions improve a number of aspects of our lives: cardiovascular fitness, ambulation, balance, and daily living activities. So a very, very worthwhile and practical center that I'm very, very supportive of. This has led to improved health-related or reduction in health-related risk factors in our population for older individuals with chronic and disabling diseases. But aside from the center's activities, both at the level of the Pepper Center and also the Center on Aging, is also the work that it's doing in education. There's also great pride in our doctoral program in gerontology, one that the program best attributes to the collaborative nature of the center. Dr. Magazina mentioned the involvement of multiple schools and multiple entities within the center, which is quite unique and quite and worthy of commendation. The program includes just about not only schools within the Baltimore campus, but also involvement of others in the Baltimore County, UMBC. Again, very, very strong programs that stretch the gamut from sociology to anthropology, psychology, engineering, among other areas. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things, the treats that I had was sitting back and enjoying the work, the day-long work that was presented last year at the Festival of Science, focusing on mobility, disability, and aging, causes, consequences, and strategies for restoration. The keynote speaker at the time was also someone from NIA, and that was Dr. Luigi Ferrucci, the scientific director of the National Institute on Aging at NIH. The NIA has always been a great partner to the School of Medicine, and much of our funding does come from NIA, so we owe the NIH, the NIA in particular, a debt of gratitude for its support over the many years. But I'm incredibly pleased to see that This afternoon, we'll be having as our keynote speaker Dr. Richard Hodes, someone who I've known for some time and have great respect for his leadership and his involvement in this area of medicine and science. Many of you know Dr. Hodes is the director of the National Institute on Aging at the NIH. He has led the critical mission since 1993, spearheading federal initiatives to support and conduct research on the biological, clinical, behavioral, and sociological aspects on aging. He also directs the federal effort to find effective ways of treating or preventing Alzheimer's disease. His efforts have revolutionized the way we think about Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. It is in that context why we applaud Dr. Hodes' commitment to advancing interdisciplinary research in aging. And I am, on behalf of our School of Medicine, delighted that Dr. Hodes, you're here to be our keynote speaker, and want to welcome you to the podium at this time.
Well, thank you for the introduction and for the opportunity to be here. I've enjoyed the day, getting to talk with many of you about the work you're doing, and now I'll take a little time to illustrate some of the things going on at NIA, a little balance of structure and function and some science, and I hope that will open the way for even more discussion. So many of you will be familiar with the structure of NIH and NIA, but I illustrated here just to help you understand the breadth of programs that may be of interest to you, that may be capable of supporting and interacting with your own work. So there's an intramural program of research, as alluded to, headed by Luigi Ferrucci here in Baltimore, and that's been one of the reasons I think that the university and NIA have had such a close relationship. And there are 4 extramural research programs that span the spectrum of the work that we support. They are not silos. They are areas of research that overlap the boundaries on which we hope we cross in the healthiest, most productive way. There's a division of aging biology, which in general, it focuses on the molecular, cellular aspects of the basic processes of aging. Division of behavior and social research, which looks at multiple aspects of behavior and social contributors to aging, and we'll look at the programs of each of these divisions in a moment. Division of neuroscience, which has been inclusive of a large part, but not all, of the work that goes on in the expanding spectrum around Alzheimer's-related dementias. And division of geriatrics and clinical gerontology. The intramural research program, just a few miles from here, has 10 intramural programs. These are scientific research programs and departments, divisions, branches that we hope interact with you all successfully. They also represent an important training program, which we hope can interact, and I know in the past has seen the exchange of many of the scientists and trainees between our 2 institutions, and certainly hope that this will continue. Division of Aging Biology has a centers program, the shock centers, which provide a good bit of infrastructure for basic research on aging and support work across the spectrum of systems biology, physiology, genetics, and molecular biology. Any of these divisions, I should add, whose leadership is illustrated here, ought to be considered by all of you as resources. I guess if there's any one suggestion I hope I've communicated and will continue to, it's you should have every motivation and no disincentive to get in touch with us at NIA. The program officers at NIA I'm most proud of as people whose lives are committed to supporting and promoting the research that you do. And lest there be any concern or any reluctance to get in touch, if you don't know who to get in touch with at NIA, quite seriously, give me a call, an email. I'll be able to put you in touch with people. They're helpful as you're planning your research, understanding where the research fits, how review happens, and any of the questions you might have at all stages of career, really. Division of Behavior and Social Research, as I've mentioned, is one of the most extensive of NIH programs across the behavioral and social sciences, and runs a spectrum, again, from individual through population studies. Also includes a good bit of expansion in the time of our work on Alzheimer's-related dementias, looking at behavioral interventions and at the issues of care and services for those living with dementia and those who care for them. Division of Neuroscience the largest of the divisions, which has grown quite extraordinarily over the past 3 and 4 years, with increases, as we'll talk about, in congressional appropriations targeted at Alzheimer's-related dementias, but including the full spectrum of neurologic and neurobehavioral aspects of aging. And the Division of Geriatrics and Clinical Gerontology does have a centers program, as you well know, a focus of the Center on Aging here at the university, and maintains a broad effort at doing all that's necessary by way of research to sustain and improve the quality of life, maintain independence, by looking at both the translation of basic processes of aging into diagnostic and interventions, as well as looking at diseases specific to aging men and women and ways in which to approach their resolution. So a little bit about the impact of increased appropriations. And many of you may be aware, but when the numbers are this good, it's fun to present them every once in a while. This is what happened in FY19, the current fiscal year, to NIH overall. So the NIH budget for the 4th year in a row increased in a very significant way to a total of $39 billion across all of NIH. There were several targeted areas in the language in the appropriation for universal health vaccine, for BRAIN, all capitals. That's the initiative that spans multiple institutes looking at modern technologies applied to better understanding of brain and central nervous system processes. Money for all of us, that is the million-strong cohort being currently recruited as an infrastructure that should serve research across all of our interests and domains. And far and away, again, the largest of these targeted increases was $425 million above the previous base. That was to NIA for Alzheimer's-related dementias research. That brought the NIA current appropriation or annual budget to $3.1 billion. It's now the 4th largest of the institutes at NIH after these last few years of increase. In addition to the targeted increase for Alzheimer's research, there was in this year, FY19, an increase of $84 million that is not targeted and therefore is a very substantial increase in our ability to support research across the whole spectrum of aging. Shown in a couple of ways, this is the trend for research by NIA appropriation in years from 2008 through the current year. The upper curve is in actual or current dollars, the lower adjusted downward for inflation. But by either, it's an extraordinary increase from about $1 billion just about 5 years ago up to over $3 billion now. And it reflects, I think, the commitment to aging, an aging population, the importance of maintaining its health and independence, that realization on the part of NIH, on the part of the department, on the part of both houses of Congress and both political parties and administrations over years. So we're quite fortunate in that respect. If you break down the increases, the lower portion in red is the area that is not targeted for a particular area or research focus. On top of that, the larger and growing blue area is that is targeted to Alzheimer's-related dementias. But we'll talk about the fact that that area itself is very broad and open to the recruitment and involvement of many of you across disciplines. So because this year, I don't know how many of you recognize the fact that we actually had a budget, an appropriation for NIA before the fiscal year began. It's been more than 2 decades since that has happened. Typically, as you know, or may know, we sure know, as the end of the fiscal year happens, we don't have a budget. We wait till midnight to see if the government closes. Usually it doesn't. Sometimes it does. And then we end up with a continuing resolution that says we're putting off the process. So we often haven't known what our budget was going to be until well into the fiscal year. That meant we had to be cautious. We couldn't tell you quite what the pay lines were going to be. We had to be careful about our initiatives. This year we had the advantage from the beginning of at least knowing our appropriation. And so relatively early in the year, we were able to make this preliminary announcement of pay lines. So for the general pay line that is not targeted for Alzheimer's-related dementias, for the more common, less expensive applications with direct costs under $500,000, the pay line here is 15. And I should note that it's early in the year, and we certainly have every reasonable hope, I think, that as the year goes along, we have a better understanding of the applications we have to fund, that we can improve upon that still more. We maintain a very strong commitment to recruiting new and early stage investigators. So as you can see here, we'll continue to provide increased pay lines for both of those categories. The early stage investigators, those within 5 years of their terminal training degree, will have a pay line of 20%. A little bit tighter pay lines for the more expensive applications. And then you can see to the right side of the slide, for Alzheimer's-related dementias, we know that the increase will allow us to maintain a pay line of 28% for the most common of applications and you can see the rest that follow. Training and career development, critically important to all of us. I had a chance to talk to some of you, both leadership and those of you involved at the level of training over the course of the day. We recognize the importance as the field increases and we fund more research of recruiting and training more people into the field. So training by T awards and individual fellowships as well as career awards are a high priority to us. The pay lines here, again, are the initial pay lines to start the year. We have every expectation those will increase for Alzheimer's and related dementias. We've been able to announce even this early in the year, even higher pay lines. It should be noted that these numbers don't tell the whole story because, for example, with the career or K awards at the level of 21, we are actually funding more than twice as many K awards as we did just a couple of years ago. So the pay line, of course, is important, but it doesn't show, unless you look at all the figures, the total investment there. So we've had an increased number of meritorious applications in these areas. Good news for everybody, tough news for those who are competing, but we're attempting to accommodate by providing more resources into these areas, the K, T, and F lines, and we'll continue to do that. So I mentioned the increased research in Alzheimer's disease, and I want to stress the way in which we have been attempting not only to increase the resources of those people already talented and doing work in the field, but to bring new people into the field as an important part of ultimate success in that area of research. In that regard, we've been tracking, and I'm very pleased to see that in the years from 2015 to 2018, as we've had our increases in appropriation, more than a fourth of the awards given for Alzheimer's-related dementias have been to new or early-stage investigators. And that's each year, that proportion. So we've now accumulated over these past few years a growing number of new people attracted into the field because of its importance, because of the intellectual challenges, and we hope many of you will find it similarly an area of interest and focus. Over a third, even larger number of the awards given are to individuals who are categorized as new to the field. They have never even applied for research to NIH in this area before. So we're expanding the number of people who could bring to bear their vision and talents to the field. One of the ways in which we specifically last year attempted to do so was a new experiment in using administrative supplements. We announced to all of the NIH institutes that for all of their grantees who were doing research that was not Alzheimer's and related dementias, that if they wanted to submit meritorious proposals for an administrative supplement to add to the work they were doing, an area that took advantage of the focus of their own work but moved it into research on Alzheimer's and related dementias, we at NIA would fund those supplements to the work of all institutes across NIH, and we're pleased at the level of response which resulted in funding of over 300 of those supplements. And this shows the numbers in bars by institute and center across NIH to give you an idea of just how broad, from NINDS, NHLBI, NIMH, all across. And I emphasize this to many of you who may be doing work that is aging related, maybe supported by NIA, but not even necessarily by NIA, but who might want to think of the relevance of what you're doing in addition to what you're doing. I'm asking you to give up one field, move to another, perhaps expand into these areas of research eligible for this kind of increased funding and supplement. And we're renewing this program this year already. So a little bit of science, at least, as we're talking about numbers and administration, just some examples. It's been important to us to try to create infrastructure to support research, as well as the high priority on individual investigator-initiated research itself. And this is an illustration for Alzheimer's-related dementias research of initiatives that provide infrastructure spanning from basic research, such things as a global effort at looking at omics, that is genomics, sequencing from diverse populations globally, provide data that are available to the research communities. We use these data to inform target ID and therefore new ways to validate targets that can be applied through translation. And at each of these levels, centers programs to screen, do safety and tox on products as they emerge, and then a whole infrastructure for clinical trials that will support innovative trials from phase 1 all the way to definitive phase 3 trials. So at each of these levels, not only are we supporting proposals, but the infrastructure in which to make them possible. To give you just one idea of the expansion we've seen, this is true in many areas of research, but here for Alzheimer's disease, genetic regions that are shown to be of interest, meaning they are either protective or risk factors as they developed across years. So in the 1990s, some of you may remember or have read about the discovery of the first genes that were causal for Alzheimer's, the amyloid precursor protein and presenilins and ApoE. And then we went on a period of years with nothing much added until the real revolution that came with the Human Genome Project and our ability to sequence many people, genotype and sequence and identify areas of risk. And you can see from the year by year the increase, but look at the way the growth has been exponential. So in this year, 2018, just passed, this is a list of the new loci that were identified. The color coding, which I know you can't read in any detail here, is intended to show you the fact that this is more than a collection of individual genes, but we're learning that these genes fall into major pathways, be it inflammatory, neuronal synapses, cytoskeletal function, giving us again clues of the areas that go wrong or can be protective in the processes that are involved in Alzheimer's dementia. So I mentioned briefly the issue of providing genetic and genomic data and making these widely available. So we've been very assertive, and the research community is very cooperative in making sure that all the research we fund generates data which are available to the whole research community without embargo, without conditions. And I hope many of you will think of taking advantage of resources such as this. One of the partnerships which has been exemplary over past years is the Accelerated Medicines Partnership, or AMP. AMP is a partnership of academics, of NIH, of course, together with private sector, pharma and biotech, as well as philanthropies. There have been AMP efforts ongoing in 3 major areas, one of which is Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, and that's the area where NIA is taking the lead. Also there for autoimmune diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, and systemic lupus, and for type 2 diabetes, and most recently one created for Parkinson's disease. And what these have in common is that bringing together public and private partnerships, they set out to establish research that provides an infrastructure for research. And as an example, in the AMP-AD, Alzheimer's disease, we've generated from thousands of individuals' brains, looking at what distinguishes brains from those affected by Alzheimer's and those not, at the level of, again, genomic data, gene expression data, proteomics. All of these data, in an extraordinary way, have been a part of, I think, of a real cultural revolution in the field in which multiple academic centers have now learned the advantage of carrying out their assays and now making the results in near real time available through a portal maintained by Sage Bionetworks, so that any of you have access to all of these data. And in fact, there are hundreds and thousands of hits in which people are taking advantage of this to lend their own expertise and hypotheses to understanding what may be the pathways involved in Alzheimer's disease. I should add an example of one of the products that has come from that effort is the publication of a list or a wall of targets. So combined committees of private sector, industry, academics have come together to look at the array of potential hits or lead targets and have announced the ones that are most promising. So that now, and again, once these are established, they become accessible to further work supported by NIA, other institutes at NIH, to further develop these candidates into real ultimate interventions. ALZPED is a disease preclinical efficacy database, just as we realized that with clinicaltrials.gov, it was important to have registries to understand what studies were being proposed, to have their endpoints dictated in advance so that it was possible to have confidence in the methodology being used. Here, we've initiated this for preclinical models, largely, but not restricted to, for example, mouse models, setting out the standards for the way studies should be conducted, and then providing a compendium of these methodologic standards and the data outcome. Part of this driven by the very unfortunate fact that in all aspects or multiple aspects of research, it's been disappointing that a lot of the animal studies were never translatable, in some cases due to the fact they may simply have been the wrong models, and others because the way in which the studies were conducted was not as rigorous as it can be. So here's an attempt to support and provide evidence to help everyone carry out studies with the highest level of rigor. NIH has a blueprint for neuroscience research that spans all of the processes and conditions of neuroscience, but in particular has a virtual pharma model by which individuals who are interested in pursuing agents that have a pathway towards clinical intervention can enter the system at just about any level. They can apply for a grant for the basic research. When it comes down to doing things that require expertise in contracting, whether it's efficacy studies or medicinal chemistry, PK toxicology, data management. We provide the infrastructure with expert project management to assist investigators in all of these. Ultimately, the initial success is already occurring to bring them forward to phase 1 clinical trials. It can be a daunting enterprise for most individuals, even most institutions, to carry out discovery all the way through development and clinical studies, and it's infrastructure, again, like this, which we use to help to make this happen. The importance of large data can't be overestimated either. This is an example of the use of the HRS, or Health and Retirement Study. Saw some posters on that today, so I know a number of you were involved in that study. It was carried out, as the name implies, health and retirement, to look what happens for people around the transition year of retirement. It's become a much broader study than that, and that is now a longitudinal study of aging with renewed cohorts over time. That studies biological as well as behavioral, social, economic variables, and taking advantage of this has led to a number of studies across the globe, now representative of most of the world's population, large studies in harmony with the US HRS, so designed to have variables that are the same, instruments that are, of course, adapted to culture and language, but otherwise the same, which means analyses can be carried out to take advantage of diverse populations and understanding the way in which differences between nations and national groups, be they environmental or genetic, can contribute to the outcomes we're looking at. And this is one case in which we've taken advantage of this by using a harmonized cognitive assessment protocol, or HCAP, which now allows in large numbers of people across the globe to be studied for cognitive changes with aging, for example, and progression towards pathologies. So it's an accessible database. HRS from its beginning took great pride in making data available in near real time, and encourage any of you who haven't had encounters but can imagine or make yourself imagine that these data might be useful in your own plans and research to think about it, to look at the website, or again, the same invocation to please feel free to contact those of us at NIA who can help you to understand how to get access and guide you through the use of these large data. Transparency and broad use of data, big data, is becoming increasingly an imperative in the way we conduct research. So to introduce the intersection between aging and chronic diseases, just a couple of slides that are around the notion that has been introduced and termed as geroscience. There are multiple diseases and conditions which, of course, have their largest risk factor being aging itself. There may be individual risk factors for individual disease, but aging itself has been a dominant risk factor for many. And so understanding the relation of that to the biology of disease is important. Similarly, around the biology of aging, there are a number of processes: proteostasis, the ability of proteins to maintain their proper structure; stem cells, DNA damage repair, the immune system. All of these changes which occur with normal aging, not necessarily in the presence of any diseases or pathologies. But the notion now is that these processes themselves may, when they go awry, provide the reason or background for the increase of chronic diseases for which aging is a risk factor. So this is the basic premise of geroscience, that if we understand the multiple factors that contribute to aging, that we may be able to impact those and thus have an impact on the many diseases or conditions of aging. As an illustration of just one of these that's been a great deal of interest of late, many of you are probably familiar with the term senescence, and particularly cellular senescence. And the term was really born with the work of Leonard Hayflick in 1961, when he made the, at that time, surprising observation that if you put cells in a tissue culture, they don't just divide forever, they divide for a particular lifetime, and after a number of divisions, they don't divide anymore. So that term's replicative senescence, when cells reach a point where they can't divide any longer, generally regarded to be an irreversible state, although there are exceptions to everything. They do more than just stop dividing. They have a specific gene expression profile that includes a secretory phenotype that includes many pro-inflammatory cytokines. And so those cells don't just sit there doing nothing, but they potentially do damage. And there's a lot of elegant research that's been done to study the effect of these cells. One of the direct and exciting approaches taken is that of developing senolytics, or methodologies for removing senescent cells. Now, if you plot the number of senescent cells in any one of our organs over time, animal models or humans, They go up gradually, but they're generally quite small percentages of cells. So these methodologies are taking advantage of a couple of strategies, which I'll mention, to eliminate that very small proportion of senescent cells in an organism and see what happens. This is one of the more recent examples that was published in Nature back last year, and it superimposed on a mouse model of Alzheimer's disease, in which there is accumulation of larger amounts of deposition of amyloid and tau here in glial cells. And if one now targets in an interesting genetic way, essentially a death gene that is expressed in this case only in glial cells, and by activating that death gene with a drug, acutely in time eliminates the senescent cells in the brain of those individual mice that have this genetic manipulation, you go from the normal amount of dentate gyrus area to, in the amyloid Alzheimer's model, a decrease. That decrease is totally reversed in this mouse model by eliminating the small proportion of senescent cells that are there. So if you quantitate this by the area of the dentate gyrus in cross-section, this is normal. This is a mouse that has the gene for Alzheimer's. This is a mouse that has the gene for Alzheimer's with senescent cells removed. And if you look at functional outcomes, so this is a discrimination index, so it's a function of cognition in mouse. In a normal mouse, with training, you go from pre-training to post-training, improved performance. The mouse model of Alzheimer's doesn't improve, doesn't learn, and that defect is largely reversed again by removing that small proportion of cells. Multiple organs, multiple tissues, these kinds of effects of removing senescent cells have been shown, and in fact, the translation of this kind of thinking to clinical studies is at its early stage. But the notion that you could treat a short period of time, remove a cohort of senescent cells, have a positive impact on the organism that would be lasting without need for continuous treatment is, of course, appealing to many. And the clearing of senescent cells through genetic manipulation is a nice thing in the laboratory, not so practical in humans. But in fact, there are drugs that have been observed and developed that will do the same thing by eliminating senescent cells selectively. Moving to a more current and practical application of research supported by NIH, which has implications for public health imperatives, has been the SPRINT study. So many of you are probably aware of the SPRINT study itself, which was carried out to compare the effects of more versus less intensive treatment of hypertension, looking at variables, the principal of which were survival and cardiovascular events. And what was found was that the standard treatment, which was treatment to a systolic blood pressure of 140, versus the intensive treatment, treatment to 120, showed this kind of decrease in both cardiovascular events and death, and therefore the study was terminated prematurely because it was unethical to continue it, and it has led to a reconsideration of the recommendations for control of blood pressure. But at the same time, we had added early in the stage of that study SPRINT Mind as a sub-study, which included memory, cognitive function, and brain imaging in the course of the study. Well, when the study was stopped early, we wondered whether the interventions had even been carried out long enough to see any difference that it might have been, asking whether controlling our blood pressure would have a positive impact, for example, on age-related cognitive decline. But in fact, as recently reported, there was an impact. So the question, does intensive treatment compared to the usual treatment reduce dementia and or mild cognitive impairment? Some nearly 10,000 hypertensives involved in the study. Was racial, ethnic, diverse as well from the beginning by its plans. And the finding was that intensive treatment resulted in a statistically significant decrease in mild cognitive impairment, which is the precursor of many forms of Alzheimer's-like dementia. In addition, there was a reduction that was significant in a composite outcome of MCI together with probable dementia. Not illustrated in the slide, there was also a decrease in white matter abnormalities in the brain that developed over time too. So this is probably the strongest direct evidence from a randomized clinical trial to date that indicates the effectiveness of an intervention in impacting positively on age-related cognitive decline and risk of dementia. And it opens the way, we hope, for many studies of this sort looking at both intervention targeted directly at amyloid or tau or synaptic health, or at cardiovascular risk factors or many of the others that might contribute overall to dementia. So in terms of funding opportunities, just to make sure they're all aware, believe it or not, I know some of our staff don't believe it, we've issued almost 100 specific funding opportunity announcements. Now, this isn't to be mistaken from our emphasis on investigator-initiated research proposals. Research proposed by you is the most valuable commodity and currency that we have, and it doesn't have to be responsive to a targeted FOA. But if you are interested in the areas of these targeted FOAs, the advantage can be that they provide appropriate settings for review and even funding in some cases to carry those out. And you can use the guide and websites here to hopefully negotiate through them yourselves. There are RFAs which are targeted to a specific one-time solicitation for a particular area of science. They carry their own review along with it and have targeted funding. There are program announcements with set-asides which have specific funding but have repeated dates. And there are program announcements which have a broader focus, multiple submission dates, and sometimes can have special reviews attached to them when we judge it necessary too. And again, conversations with many of you, of course, of the day has illustrated the importance of having the right review for the right application, and it's a commitment we try to help you in achieving. So there's also something of a change I hope will be confusing to you around Alzheimer's initiatives. Because we've had so many, in order to increase the efficiency of issuing them, instead of the multiple individual initiatives we put out, we are incorporating many of them under special notices of special interest and under parent FOAs. If you have any confusion about what this means in finding the right solicitation to which you can respond, again, contact any of us at NIA and we can help you with it. All these changes, I think, are genuinely in the area of making it easier to find where your research falls and how to apply. And one particular area of research support I wanted to mention to you, perhaps not all aware of, is the small business funding opportunity. So Congress has mandated for all the institutes across NIH that a given percentage of our grants budget be used for support of small business opportunities. And the advantage of them are, of course, that it does provide ways in which to work at commercializing some of the research tools that fall out of research. They generally involve, therefore, collaboration between academics and small businesses. And as NIA's budget has grown and the proportion of research that is legislated to be supported by SBR and STTR has increased, this should show you that from 2013 through 2019, there's been a huge increase in the funds available. So this $105 million program is a very substantial one for any of you who want to think about how your work may be amenable to this kind of commercial translation. Not a bad thing, of course, to have the fruits of our discovery have practical application. We have an office just recently established for small business opportunities, and you can, through me or through our website, get in touch. We're happy to help to guide you through the process that is involved in these applications. And then finally, as we're looking for all sorts of ways, incentives, and mechanisms to encourage research, this is our first experience with using the prize mechanism. So iCare is a challenge. We chose an area that is perhaps most easily done apart from our usual grant mechanisms, where with an acceptable investment of time and effort, very bright people working here to develop technology applications to improve dementia care, coordination, or navigation. This means ideally an app that can be widely used by a public that needs a lot of help in understanding where the resources lie and working their way through this in care for those with dementia. Submissions are open till October 1st, and from October last year through June 30th coming up, and then there'll be a judging and a prize. NIH is experimenting with this mechanism. It's different from supporting your research. It's telling you if you can meet the goals of the research. We're not funding the research itself. We're putting out a prize to provide incentive to do it. And online, you can see what this is all about too. But it's, again, trying to leave no stone unturned to use multiple mechanisms to encourage the kind of research that we want to see. Training programs. Talked in the beginning about how important they are to us. Our near neighbor, the intramural program of NIA on the Bayview campus of Johns Hopkins. This is the STAR, the Summer Training and Aging Research Program that goes on every year. Just advertising it here. Obviously, it complements very well the training experiences you have yourself. And we've had folks from the university here spend time in this training program, and happy to have that exchange continue. The Butler Williams Scholars Program, I don't know how widespread information is about it. I hope it's well known to you. It's really an exceptional program that brings together for an intensive week on the NIH campus in Bethesda groups of early stage faculty to meet, interact with one another, to be spoken to and to speak with some of the leading luminaries in aging research, to go through exercises like a drafting of a grant proposal and then mock review. It emphasizes health disparities, emphasizes interdisciplinary work, and over the years has created real cohorts of people who maintain their contact with the university themselves as groups of investigators. So I urge you, the application deadline, March 22nd for this year, is coming up. It's always oversubscribed, but it's an outstanding program and opportunity, and I'm sure we've got some graduates here. And then Paul Beeson Emerging Leaders Career Development Program in Aging. This is a new competition, a new RFA that is, again, a career development, early stage investigator program that has been extraordinary, again, in providing the mentoring and partnerships and cohort development that comes with the program. And GEMSTAR, yet another. This is intended to bring people from any of the medical and surgical specialties who have an interest in aging research into the field by providing small grants, in fact, R03 grants, and a competition for those individuals who come with a career development program aimed at bringing their work into the field of aging. It's included medicine, general medicine, surgical subspecialties, emergency medicine, and has been and anesthesiology have been some of the largest subscribers, cardiology, oncology, and again, it's an opportunity to have research supported, but also become a part of a network that has very successfully brought people in the much needed clinical specialties into aging research, basic, translational, and clinical. So just some dates coming up for major events. The Geroscience Summit, which deals with the concept of geroscience that I've mentioned, looks for the relationship between basic biology of aging and its translation or interaction with clinical relevant outcomes. We'll have its third summit in November in Bethesda. The Dementia Care and Services Summit, I mentioned that in addition to the efforts to find cures and prevention for disease, that we are looking extensively at rigorous means of identifying what interventions work to improve the quality of life of those living with dementia and those who care for them. And that's the Dementia Care Service Summit, that is the next of which is scheduled in 2020. Ways to stay informed and connected. There are online resources. There's the blog, which if you subscribe, I think many have found to be very useful. Every week we have to put out updates on all aspects of funding, initiatives, science, discovery that we hope will appeal to people interested in aging research. And if you're not already a subscriber, I hope you'll sign up. And thanks for the patience in listening through this little presentation. If there's time and it meets the schedule, I'll be happy to talk with people.
Perfect. Let's see if there are any open questions from the group, from anyone. Quiet group. I must have covered the whole gamut. We have a question. Identify yourself.
So thank you for the question. Well, so NIH is a federal agency, doesn't determine policy, but we, of course, think there's an obligation to carry out research that informs policy. So to the several questions that you mentioned, identifying for individuals living at home, living alone, living in residential settings, living in care facilities. In those circumstances, what are the determinants of positive outcomes? What interventions can help to achieve those outcomes? And we hope the results of those studies will then become policy drivers. An example is the study carried out a number of years ago, REACH, which looked at ways in which caregivers caring for individuals with Alzheimer's disease might best be helped to achieve both prolonged ability of the individual living with dementia to stay at home and better health status of the care provider. It was a very successful study. It looked at effects of racial ethnic groups. It was well powered, and it was a positive clinical study. In fact, arguably in the area of Alzheimer's research, it's one of the most positive clinical studies that was carried out. And some of you may know there's now a REACH VA. So this has been disseminated, supported by the VA. Indian Health Service is supporting its version. So these are examples of the way in which what we do gets disseminated. Other areas, not necessarily in Alzheimer's and Alzheimer's care, but the diabetes prevention trial that was carried out some years ago, NIDDK, together with NIA contributing the emphasis on the older populations. Some years ago, there was another study that was stopped prematurely because the outcomes were so positive it was unethical to continue. And it's shown of interest that in the older individuals at risk for diabetes, that physical activity and diet were more effective than drugs like metformin in preventing some of the clinical outcomes. Well, that was taken up now by a program disseminated through the WISE, the YMCA, YWCA programs that have built this in, and there are now observational studies going on to see how this translates from the laboratory setting into broader settings. So we hope there will be more of these that inform policy.
Other comments or questions? Question. Heather.
You had mentioned some of the international work that's been done with the HRS. What are some of the limitations that American researchers who's currently overseas might face when applying to the NIA?
So the question was, what obstacles might there be for a researcher living abroad who wants to apply for research support for NIA or NIH? Well, generally the guidelines for support have to do with the institution that's being funded. Formally, technically, we provide the award to the institution, although there's a principal investigator, obviously, who is the critical scientific leader in that. So if it's wherever the person happens to be living, if he or she is associated with the University of Maryland and wants to submit an application for research, that's to the University of Maryland, that works fine. Sometimes there are subcontracts that are necessary if the research is designed to do surveys in another part of the world. Subcontracts can be a part of it. For research through a foreign institution, there are specific guidances. It requires special action by our advisory council and depends upon a demonstration that work could not be carried out or could be carried only with great difficulty only outside the United States. There simply is no resource in the U.S. to carry them out. But we fund a number of those by exception. We do make those exceptions. And foreign research supported through primary grants to U.S. academic institutions are also even more widespread.
Question.
Thank you so much. My name is Beth Logan. I'm interested in chronic pain. And chronic pain is a major cause of disability. It's highly prevalent in older adults. There's new research showing that it contributes to dementia. We certainly know that it increases the risk of falls. With the HEAL funding, and how is that impacting NIA's interest in addressing chronic pain in older adults?
So it's pain in older adults, as at any age, of course, is a major issue. And there's a long-term interest in the part of NIA in that field. You're right, the HEAL initiative, which is a recently targeted NIH-wide initiative with funding to look at pain relief in the context of opioids, of course, as an issue as well, is an initiative in which NIA is participating. So we certainly invite research proposals in that area, looking at, for example, age-related differences in the sensation of pain, in the interventions that will be effective in preventing pain. As you point out, the association of pain and its perception in the course of cognitive changes or other neurologic changes, all well within the domain of research we would like to see.
There's another, yes.
My
My name is Emerson Wigmeyer. I'm a sleep disorder specialist. I'm curious your takeaways for those of us interested in sleep-related research, particularly sleep's impact on Alzheimer's and cognition. If you could please speak to both measurement as well as implementation of the great.
Yeah, so sleep research is an area of real emphasis. We just recently had a joint visit from the leadership of the several sleep research organizations, and I know from having looked at the data that they prepared for us to see, in fact, that if you look at the funding that's going into pain research, the sleep research, excuse me, over the course of years, that the trajectory for NIA, I think it's fair to say, has had the largest increase in sleep research proportionally. The specific areas you've mentioned are extremely exciting. I think the way in which sleep interacts with Alzheimer's has often been appreciated. Cause and effect were debated and could still be debated, but at the level of biomarker and molecular studies, I'm sure many of you are aware of the observations tantalizing that, in fact, the clearance from the brain through lymphatic systems of some of the potentially toxic molecules associated with dementias is more rapid during sleep than not, and therefore that sleep itself may be a part of the process that determines the equilibrium between potentially damaging or toxic substances in the brain. The measurement you mentioned of sleep has become better. You know, it used to be, and it just isn't very tenable, that putting people in a sleep center to sit for a night or two or some weeks was the state of the art. Very hard to do, but fortunately, again, as we hear from the experts, the remote sensing technologies have continued to improve to the point that we can carry out studies beyond the simple actigraphy that used to be done to really monitor either movement or even the sort of portable EEG sensing devices. And I think it's only going to get better. This is going to make more rich the data that go in, and whether it's viewed in parallel with other biomarkers and longitudinal studies for individuals, there has been an expansion and will continue. It's an area of great interest for NIA among other institutes at NIH as well.
Okay. Why don't we thank Dr. Hodes for his spending the afternoon. And I would like to invite everyone right outside the door there. We have some refreshments, and the posters are still available. And Dr. Hodes said he would stay around for a few minutes for those who want to speak with him. And thank you all for spending the afternoon with us.